Hello, dear men. It's good that you actually dared to come back after the previous presentation. You did come back for more. I think after this previous presentation, if you're still able to digest even one single piece of information, respect, because then your cognitive skills must be way beyond what I can imagine. Anyway, I wish I could somehow offer you some kind of physical exercise, in order to create a certain balance, to compensate for the input we've just had. But I'm afraid I'm no good at that. I can't offer you that. Like he said, I'm only, what did he say? A tiny man who likes to talk. Well, yeah. And I'm not even a philosopher. I'm only a psychologist, which makes me even tinier than him. But anyway. Well, yes. So in a way, I wanted to pick up on all the stuff that I already told you last night in the panel session, in the panel discussion. Now, the colleague used a very nice word. Alexander used a very nice word. He used the word mindfuck. And I think that's interesting because sometimes all the intellectual and theoretical discussions about gender roles and what it is being a man, this is very enriching. And I think this is also a very lustful way to talk about this. In a way, it is a mind fuck. So let's keep mind fucking. Okay, now let's talk about the topic. And just one more thing. I don't have this remote control for the slides. Do we have any slides for me here, by the way? Are they here? Sorry. Maybe I should have discussed that with the organizers up front. Obviously, my slides aren't here. You're asking me if I had sent you any slides. Yes, I did send you slides. Or maybe I didn't. Maybe I just forgot to send you my slides. You didn't get anything. Well, no matter. Do you have them on a stick, perhaps? I think that would probably take a bit too long now. Maybe I'll just try to remember what I wanted to say. It's also helpful for me, because normally I need the slides as a reminder to remind me what I wanted to say. Well, that's nice, but you see, failure is nothing to be proud of. It's part of life, but it's nothing to be proud of. Well, no, flip chart doesn't really help me, because there's nothing written on the flip chart. I need the slides to remind me what I wanted to tell you. Anyway, I'll try to make do without the slides. You see, my therapy often focuses very much on the acceptance of your own helplessness. So I have to accept my helplessness now. Now, what I do remember, what I wanted to say, because it's written here on this book, is the title. I remember the title of the presentation. Men? What it means today to be a man and father. So men, that's the main title, and then it says what it means today to be a man and father. Now, you see, I asked myself, what would be a good title for a book about men? And that's why I decided to call it Men. I thought it would be quite an appropriate title. But what I really wanted to focus on today is the second part of the title, what it means today to be a man and a father. And when I say what it means today, I'm not implying... This does not mean I'm trying to say what a good man is or what a good father is. I'm not going to give you any advice today. I'm not going to give you any tips or any explanations. I'm not going to say what I think is a good father or a good man. You're not going to hear any advice or tips from my side today. I'm not going to say, discover your sexuality, or, as we heard in the previous presentation, men should be out there in the woods, they shouldn't be at home with the kids. So I'm not going to give you any advice or tips. I'm not going to say how many months of parental leave, paternal leave you should have in order to be a good father. You see, tips and advice can be quite helpful if somebody is insecure, if somebody is helpless. For example, if I ask myself, what kind of dowel am I supposed to use to get a nail into this wall? Or how can I use this tool without castrating myself? Or who is the best pediatrician? If you have questions like these, then very practical questions, then of course tips and advice can be very helpful. So there's nothing wrong with tips and advice, but I would just like to discuss the topic because we're talking about a very individual process here, the formation and creation and development of gender identities, your role as a father, your own identity. When it comes to these processes, I think tips and advice can even be counterproductive. If we wanted a controversial panel discussion, last night we didn't have a very controversial discussion, so maybe for a controversial panel discussion we could have Alexander, Björn, the Björn we heard yesterday, plus me, we could have a discussion. Although I would never sit down for a panel discussion with Alexander because he's an intellectual warrior. He would have kind of killed me intellectually before I even see him coming. Yeah, I think you know what I mean. Anyway. So I don't have any slides, and what makes it even more difficult for me is I actually had 10 things, 10 points I wanted to make. By the way, I still haven't said what I want to talk about. As I said, I don't want to give you any advice. I said I don't want to give you any tips, but what do I want to talk about? Well, when I say what it means today to be a good man and father, I want to see what are the consequences for us as men in the current situation. What is the social context? And what are the psychological processes that go on when we go through this lifelong process of developing our gender identity? Because this process never stops. It's never completed. All of us here, we haven't finalized this process yet. Sometimes we have the feeling that we have now really developed our own male identity, but only until the next crisis sets in, or until we have our next child, until we become father the next time. So it's a lifelong process, this formation and development of our gender identity. It's a lifelong process, and what I would like to talk about is what I developed was some kind of a list of requirements and a list of conclusions. Because the question is, what are the conclusions? What does this mean? What are the things that we as men and women and as a society as a whole have to do? What needs to be done? What are the requirements? What needs to be changed? And that's why I call it, no, it's not on the slide, but I called it a manifesto with 10 requirements, 10 demands. So I'm even worse. You see, I don't give any advice, I don't give any tips, I just express demands. This is even worse in a way, but okay. Now, these demands or these requirements, that's exactly what I wanted to share with you now. They're, by the way, they are not only things that we as men have to do, but I sometimes make similar presentations at bookstores or conferences where you have like 70 or 80 or 90% women in the audience. 15 years ago, it used to be even worse. When I wrote my first book and I had a reading at a bookstore, there was only like one man in the audience and all the others were women. So out of the 10 requirements that you are about not to see on the screen, I'd say that only the first 2 are really targeted at men, whereas the other 8 are for both men and women. And now I'll try to remember them. I still remember the first one. And what it means is the first requirement is men, emancipate yourself. And obviously in this group here today, this requirement, I no longer have to talk about it because it would be totally out of place, because men who spent the entire weekend here at the Male Evolution event, who invest so much time also in the preparatory work for this conference, you all are men who obviously ask themselves so many questions about your own masculinity, about your gender role. Obviously, you deal with this topic very much. So in a way, I'm preaching to the converted. You are the 0.0001%. You are like the spearhead of the movement. So I don't have to tell you about this first requirement. It really means preaching to the converted. Converting the preachers? How do you say that? Anyway, but still, I would maybe still talk about this requirement a little bit for the men and women out there. When I say, what does that mean when I say emancipate yourselves? Because the word emancipation is used and misused a lot. So what does that mean? I mean it literally. Emancipating oneself means to liberate yourself from tips and advice and regulations from outside in order to find out what is really your cup of tea, what is really your own thing. That's what emancipation is all about. And here I have to say, and I mean it's not new, it's well known that women started that much earlier, this process of emancipation. And when I say women, again, I have to say it's not all women. I mean, it's only a small percentage of women who really care about emancipation and to think about it. But still, this process of emancipation, liberating yourself from expectations. For example, how do women want us to be? How does the society want us to be? And instead, to focus on the question, how do I want myself to be? That's exactly what we as men should also do, just like the women started the process earlier than we did. And we have to liberate ourselves a bit from all the expectations that come from outside, all these people who try to tell us what to be, how to be, and to find our own direction. Then again, we should not reject everything that comes from outside. That wouldn't be very emancipated either. As you know. You see, if you do all your life what your parents told you to do, then of course you are not emancipated. But if you spend your entire life doing exactly the opposite of what your parents told you to do, you're not really emancipated either. Because then, in a way, you would still be under their influence. You are like a professional rebel. No, the question is, which of the things that others told me, even if it was my parents, like it or not, all your genes come from these two people, from your parents. Now, which of the things they tell you to do might be right for you, and which of them are not right for you? That process is what I call emancipation, and it's a very painful and difficult process. And that's why I wouldn't say I mean, quite often people talk, quite often the expectations from outside, the things that your parents tell you, for example, sometimes they tell you you should be strong and so on, but of course, it's not only a question of strength, but when I think about myself, I do not only think about my strengths, but also about my weaknesses and my disappointments and my despair. And of course, that's not what the outside world wants to get from you. That's not what the outside world wants you to be. So that was my first requirement. Emancipate yourself. By the way, why are you wearing headphones? Am I being translated? Oh, yes, into English. Great.
I thought probably the interpreters would add some comments to make myself understandable. So you notice I'm just trying to avoid the point to openly admitting that I do not remember. Point number 2, it's a relatively difficult situation to meditate into your inner self. I'm not so emancipated. No, it's good to have this PowerPoint presentation after all those years. Now I remember. Good that you are so patient. That was also a large part of the book. What I studied thoroughly when writing this book just to promote this process of emancipation. Well, emancipation is always difficult if you want to move away from certain prescriptions, if they are not clear. If they are not clear-cut, if they are rather communicated in subtle ways, but with general rules, that is the case. We have not learned it at school as a subject, masculinity studies. Now we get it in an unconscious way, passed on through generations, through advertising, and if anything is transmitted in subtle and implicit ways rather than being explicitly imposed ideologies. Well, I will now move into Alexander's territory. Ideology, National Socialism, Communism, well, they last at best for a couple of centuries because these are explicit tenets or explicit dogmas. Sooner or later there will be a resistance. But if everything is subliminal only, then it is difficult to fight back. That's also why it took such a long time before women started fighting back against patriarchy. What is it, after all, that traditionally, well, for thousands of years, has been passed on implicitly, but also over the last 10 to 30 years? What is it exactly that is flooding into our minds? Let me talk about the traditional part. And first, I collected things. Well, we know it in rough outlines. The teacher, the protector, and also the strong rock in the storm. That's the man. Well, I noted it down, about 50 pages of material, raw material. I tried to structure it, to classify these things. What are the main points on this list? What is the core? And then I ended up with three essential elements. One is even more important than the other two. The more I looked into this, the clearer it became that this concept of traditional masculinity is like a law. It's not only a concept, it's like a law. If we violate this law of traditional masculinity, we are punished. We are punished by disregard, quite often also with libel, with discrimination. Not legally punished, but we are sanctioned in the truest sense of the word. That's why I put it down like this. There is something, a law of traditional masculinity. From my point of view, there is a preamble to this. I looked, well, in laws, you have the preamble, the incipit of the law, the spirit that is enshrined in the law. Being a man, being a traditional man means not having any emotions. That's the core element of the construct of traditional masculinity, a total ban on emotions, the ban on emotion. I call these emotions or feelings. I mentioned this. Someone showed up and said, "What are the emotions? Could you please give me a complete list?" This is not funny. That was a man that was so utterly in blocking of feelings. He had interiorized this ban on feelings so much that he couldn't input cycle. We have fear, sorrow, helplessness, shame, guilt, joy, surprise. That's probably not so crucial in life, but surprise. But all these emotions, we must not have them. We should not have them to fulfill the traditional concept of masculinity. From my point of view, it's not about aspiring to something great, to have a phallic goal in life. Now, to be a true man, you don't have to be the first one. There are millions of men out there in the world. They are average breadwinners, they are average lovers, and so on. Still, they feel as true men or authentic men because they belong to this traditional concept of masculinity, of not having any feelings. They do not have to be the best one, but in a certain crisis, if they certainly well up or they cry out in tears because the children have been taken away from them, then all the masculinity is gone, is scuppered. The participants will remember, we all know we could not avoid but crying. I have I could not avoid having feelings. Otherwise, I would not have become a therapist for men. It broke out of my. I was afraid of climbing those scaffolds, and that was punished. The worst judges are not the others. We are our own worst judge, not the others. You are a softie. I myself told myself, rebuked myself, you are a softie. So that's a key issue. Now I got back on track. My second call is, and this call is directed at us men, we need a male rebellion against this ban on feelings or emotions. Here I am really happy about this applause. I think I need it, apparently. I don't have to explain it that you stand up against this ban on emotions. Bastian Schweinsteiger, my favorite example. You remember, how long has it been? 2 years ago, he had this farewell match, Bastian, and he cried. Yes, let's put it like this. He cried. Yes, I would say, yes, it's a normal human and male reaction. It was probably sadness, but also commotion that so many clapped their hands, and he cried, and I cried too. And I said, geil, oh cool, how cool is that? I can deliver thousands of speeches and talks if Bastian Schweinsteiger serves as a role model and lives. He will reach millions of men. And I was shocked to see the shit storm, as they put it in. You don't need the translation here. Shit storm, I hope you understand this, that was brewing in the media. The Die Zeit, I was very disappointed because I thought it was a gender-sensitive media. Die Zeit, writing about the new whining and grinding of men. The self-compassion, the second call. Now I start out crying like the other guy. I would have wished, that Bastian Schweinsteiger calls a press conference, standing up on stage. Hey guys, if you criticize me because I have played like shit, if I dress up badly, no Christian, but that a man in the year 2017 is lambasted or is criticized because he sheds tears of sadness. I find this so out of date. Bye-bye. That's it. You have made my life better. Yes. Had I become a soccer pro, it would have been a much better life, or PR advisor of Bastian Schweinsteiger. I will never have such a big act. Well, there are three elements. That was the preamble. What else do we have in this law on traditional masculinity? I try to do away with them rather quickly. Two other elements. The first one, the ban on doing anything that in any sort could be associated with femininity. You have been pestered with psychoanalysis. I do not want to continue down that. An ultimative part of the construct of traditional masculinity is the radical defense against anything what women have. From my point of view, it's a logic construction because, for example, the capacity to give birth to a baby while the contribution of the men must be proven, must be worked out before. As a matter of fact, in this image of traditional masculinity, we have a strong defense against anything to be associated with femininity. For example, a boy who wants to dance in the ballet, it's a social suicide. Even girls that want to play football, boys that want to dance in the ballet. Did I say ballet? Ballerino, who want to become a ballerino. So I have also sub-paragraphs, defense of homosexuality, the effeminate sexuality. I have never understood why men that love other men must be associated with femininity, because what else can be masculine if you are a man, a male, and love other males? So this form of utter defense of any gender atypical professions, like my tiny little psychotherapist, the therapeutic auntie, the faggot, the psychoanalytic faggot. So these things, because I do something which is considered to be originally a female, psychoanalysis or psychotherapy is considered to be traditionally it's a female thing, but is it biological, nurture or culture? Nature or nurture, I do not go into that. We are being discriminated against. In terms of gender philosophy, I would say we need, at any rate, an opening up of the, how shall I put it, of the atypical areas for the other gender. So more men in nursery schools and more women in automotive workshops. Manuela Schwesig was criticized yesterday. Let me add on this. When she was Minister for Families and Women and all those superfluous things, she always was up in. She said also many sensible things, but she was out of equality of opportunities. It's not about equality. It's not about the equality of genders, but about equalities of opportunities. It's about that girls can become anything and boys can become anybody or anything. Isn't there a why doesn't she have a psychological advisor? It's so naive. If boys never see men that take a caring attitude towards it, if girls never see women that tinker about with cars, how should they ever think that this can be a job or a profession adequate for boys or girls? Even though this is utterly unpopular, we do not need 50-50, but from my point, we need a proximity, a getting closer of the numbers of the shares. Otherwise, we will not have the parity of genders.
The next sub-clause, the next sub-paragraph in this area of traditional masculinity, again, it's a point that I don't really have to explain here. I always have to explain it to the women, though, but not to you. Because this second subclause, the second subparagraph says men must not fail. Men must never be a failure in no domain, in no area, not at work, not in bed, not on the couch, not during a conversation, not as a father. So it is definitely forbidden for a man to fail. Now the problem is, and that's a problem women often don't understand, the problem is, as a man, you are a failure as soon as you're not the winner. If you're number 2, you're a failure. That's where failure starts. You see, I saw little boys who went to a table tennis competition with 20 other boys. They were number 2 in the end. There was only one guy who was better. And they would sit in a corner crying a quarter of an hour later because they were only the second. They were only number 2. They lost the final match. I think the knockout system, the loser is out, this system was probably invented by a man. All men are allowed to play until almost all of them have lost, except for one. Except for one guy. All the others have lost. But, and here it comes. For this one guy, even for this one guy, for the winner, it is only a victory for a short period of time, because the next competition is coming up very soon, and there he will have to defend his title. There was a researcher who once said, masculinity is like a medal that is only awarded temporarily. Sexuality is a good example here. I had some men in my therapy who came to me because they failed sexually once. 55-year-old men who'd had sex for 35 years or 40 years, and then they came to me and they said, well, my physician referred me to you because I have an erectile dysfunction. I don't get a hard one. So I said, well, when did that start, that problem? And then he said, well, it started 4 weeks ago. I said, 4 weeks ago, that was the last time that happened? I mean, when did it start? Well, it happened 4 weeks ago when I wanted to have sex with my wife. And I said, what do you mean, it only happened once? Yeah, it happened. Once. And I said, once? And I said, that was the first time. I mean, how long have you been sexually active? Well, 40 years. Okay, and it's the first time that you didn't get a hard-on? Yeah, I'm not making this up. That's how the conversation went. And I said to him, I don't know. Maybe I'm the one who needs a therapy in that case, if that's such a big problem. I like to tell this example, not in order to make fun of the man, nor in order to make fun of myself. I mean, you're here to make fun of me. I don't have to do that myself. But I'm telling this example because this really deeply touched me, because it was really, in a nutshell, what the problem was. He felt he no longer was a real man because he had failed once. And if you think about the suicide rate amongst men, and you probably know that it's 3 times as high as for women, and the gap is even increasing. It's interesting because the suicide rate amongst men is increasing, whereas the suicide rate of women has been declining continually ever since the beginning of the women's movement. So from a psychological perspective, you could see, when you look at the way the gender roles and gender relations have changed, then it is not really the men who benefit from that. So we still have quite a long way to go, but we have to say very clearly, when you think about the way the gender relations have changed so far, the women benefit from that a bit, and that is very well, why not? But men don't really benefit from that yet. And now I lost my line of thought again. What did I want to say? Doesn't matter. I think we can just move on to the next requirement, the next. Oh, no, just a moment. I wanted to talk about this ban on failure. Men are not allowed to fail. Exactly. And one more thing about the suicide that I wanted to say. There were also famous men who committed suicide. Who did not just attempt, but really committed suicide after they failed once in one area of life. You know, a businessman whose business went bankrupt, the businessman killed himself. So there are examples of men who fail once and they kill themselves. So I think it's really important to think about this law on traditional masculinity to say men are not allowed to fail. So my request is, what we need as a society is a culture of failing men. A social environment in which it is okay for men to fail. A social environment where it is normal for men to fail, because it is normal. I mean, I fail 20 times every day. Even if I just see how often I try to be the best father in the world, even in that field, I fail 20 times a day. I don't really try to be a real man anymore, because I fail too often on that one. But even in order to be a good father, I fail 20 times a day. It's part of human identity to fail. I wouldn't say being a man means to become better and better and better. Quite seriously, 50% of us, if you look at it mathematically, 50% of us manage to be better at something than the father was. That's a mathematical fact. Everything else would be absurd. So the chance that you're better somewhere, that you're a better father, that you have better sex, or that you're better at origami, or the chance that you're better in these fields, one of these fields, than your neighbor is 50%. The chance that you are worse is also 50%. Just to remind you, there's a 50-50 chance. Maybe you're better, maybe you're worse, maybe you're superior or inferior. So whatever you do every day, and compare this to how your father would have done it, there's a 50% chance you're better and a 50% chance you're worse. Oops, 20 minutes. Okay, I really have to hurry up because I also wanted to take questions afterwards. So let me skip the next topic because that would have been partnership. Or is partnership relevant to anyone here? Okay, well then very briefly, relationships. I have a fantastic cartoon on this topic, on partnership and relationships. And I can share that with you if you like. I can share that. If you send me an email, I will share this cartoon with you. It's a fantastic cartoon. I'll tell you what happens in the cartoon. I know that, of course, is not as funny as watching the cartoon, but still I tell you what happens there. And one sentence before I do. Over the past 20 years, we've had these traditional requirements for men, but also modern requirements as to what men should be like. And these requirements are voiced by women, by other women in our society, but also by the woman who's sitting at home on the couch next to us. I don't have to explain them. The requirements are you have to be emotionally open, you have to be a good father, you have to do more work in the household, you have to ask the wife how her day was at work. So that's a new, modern requirement we are confronted with. Which does not mean that the old, traditional requirements would have gone away. It's not like there's a new system that has substituted the old one, but both sets of requirements are there, the old ones plus the modern ones. I like to call that a double requirement. And this double requirement, of course, can be too much stress, too much work, and can get us into a crisis. And as I said yesterday, a crisis is a very healthy thing for most relationships. A crisis is a good thing for most human beings. Because as a psychoanalyst, I believe that a crisis always gives you the chance to change. Because in a crisis, you are always challenged to think about yourself. And I have to say, all my life, you see, I've been dealing with gender topics simply because I'm not a real man. And that got me into a crisis, and that's why I started dealing with this topic. And the good thing is I even managed to write a book about it. So, yes, when journalists ask me, when female journalists ask me, are men in a crisis today? And I say, unfortunately, not yet, not sufficiently. Because if we ask men out there, are you in a crisis, then 90% of them won't know what we are talking about. So we are not sufficiently in a crisis yet. Because I think this crisis would be a tremendous challenge for society. Maybe it is the historic opportunity that our generation now has in order to achieve a genuine emancipation. And of course, all of this, well, happens in the relationships, because that's where we are confronted with women. And even though we just learned in a previous presentation that the outer circle and the inner circle shouldn't really meet. But anyway, now what happens in this cartoon that I wanted to show you is there's a woman, and she says, well, this whole concept of masculinity, that's the problem of our society. Men must be able to break out of their traditional roles. They have to be able to show weakness and emotions. And then there's the man who says, well, but it's not so easy to show your weakness. If you've been taught for decades that you have to be strong and invulnerable. And then the woman says, and it's a bit mean because of the role the woman plays here in this cartoon, but anyway, the woman says, well, now we are starting to talk about the me, how difficult it is. Now be a man and stop crying. But I didn't make up that cartoon, but I like it.
Und dann gibt's dann.
And there is a fourth picture, and the two are silent. That's the situation of so many couples that are intellectually half emancipated, but behaviorally there is still room for development. I being a therapist, I do not know who to shake first. the woman, Miss Meyer, may I give you some feedback on how you talk to your partner? You want him to show weakness, and then you say, once he shows his weakness, then you criticize him sharply. So can you rethink this, or should I rather shake the man, telling him, open up your mouth, speak up. Sweetie, that's not possible. I can, the prince of, or the jack of all the trades is no longer on offer. I want to develop further. Once again, please don't mishear me as a plea for peeing on your 2 feet. I can talk about myself. I want to develop further, yes. It matters to me what you think of me and what you want to have from me. But hey, this wish and this wish cannot be fulfilled just for scarcity of time. And then there is another wish or desire that I cannot fulfill. This type of emancipation in partnership. Probably I'm left with only 10 minutes in the subtitle. What does it mean to be a father? Let me use 5 of those 10 minutes to read something out of the book, because if I speak freely on fatherhood, then I become overheated, and I try to control myself by reading a text. Because being a man, well, I am immediately affected, but I'm rather consolidated. But being a father is probably the most important component of my identity, and where I suffer most of the discriminations. That's why I'm so cross all the time. Therefore, in a very objectifying manner, I'm going to read out. As to the main topics, I don't need to elaborate on this key problem. So it would be a really controversial panel with Alexander Barth. The main problem is that fathers cannot participate on an equal footing. They are not an educational partner at eyes level, both in their own self-concept and also in the concept that is imposed on them, ruling out the present men. So we do not have a concept of parenthood that is really egalitarian. I don't have so much time left, so I will cut out. I would rather give you room for questions. Just one example. What I'm referring at this everyday discrimination of fathers. It's not a, you can't be a good father. No, rarely will you hear something like it. Therefore, let me read out. As a becoming father, during various preventive checkups, you are hardly ever involved. Can be understood. Physical and psychological well-being of the mother need to be ensured. Still, it was interesting to see how among 3 women, among 20 members of the so-called medical professions being ignored, really ignored. Have I said ignored? What really frustrated me, that it continued even after birth, everywhere, in institutions, among strangers and among friends. When my wife and I myself, as being freshly made parents, when we talked about, the 4 of us talked about weather, outings, all funny stories of our children, everything up to the point in time when another present mother was remembered of problems in digestion or sleep, turned to another mother. What do you do to put them to bed, or what do you give them for eating? From that point on, neither I nor any other of the present fathers were involved, let alone eye contact. There were no signs that my mother that my wife was the sole responsible. On the contrary, probably even in the presence of the affected mother, I had expressed myself about the eating and sleeping habits of our common child. Never did they ask the two of us, what would the two of you give to your children for eat? But well, while I first thought that it was due to the fact that the mothers were friends amongst themselves, but still the same experience reiterated itself when I was the friend specifically of that mother. There was still a more sensational anecdote. The two, mother and daughter, they are so nice people, but in all gender matters, they are the personification of the stereotype. I wonder at times whether they are a sort of gender performance art project that fool me, because I think they are a real couple of parents. Be it as it may be, some weeks before the anniversary, I handed over the invitation card of my daughter to the mother. She commented on it, and what does your beloved one want for birthday? Well, I will better ask your wife for a gift, about the gift. As I have such experiences quite often, I fell into deep shock only for a short while. I remember, you could also ask me, because I am here. I was smiling in a friendly manner at this mother. She looked back and started smiling too. So, that's how we stood in front of each other for a while before one of our children distracted our attention. Then we went together to our cars. She did not ask or inquire about any ideas for a gift, but she called up my wife. I'm not creative enough. This is factual prose. It's not fiction. So this happened exactly like I describe it here. I do not want to blame only the mothers or the women. There are also studies on this question. I recently read a study, what are mothers better at in education, what are fathers are better at in education. Well, the outcome, 40% of the mothers in an anonymous service, 40 mothers went down. They answered a father, a man, cannot take a child as well to a doctor or reading out a book. It was not about who reads out, who is better at this or that, but it was just about competence, not performance. Well, we could lean back. 42% of all fathers stated the same thing. 2% more, 42% of all fathers responded that mothers are better at bringing a child to the doctors. There is just one social category that thinks fathers are so dumb or as much as mothers, and these are the fathers. They do not respect themselves. It's not just nonsense. It is a proven fact. But to bash women or men, it's a societal problem. We all together, so we could also work on this joint problem also in a joint manner, in a cooperative manner, independently of the fact that I love this format here. Stereotypes are a common problem. There is certainly also an implication. I have become so angry once again. Oh, so more men into the early childhood education. How many minutes? 10, 5 minutes? I'll stop right away. Although I would have to tell 2 or more, 3 things, but it would have been a pathetic summary or anything. So I'll cut out on that. the last thing would be something, the pearls in front of the swines. So well-educated academics, I tell them, so I do not want to ask to go home and say, yes, yeah, we all know it, but the difficult people out there don't know. We all need to change something. Yeah. We can be role models. So I wanted to cut out on this pathetic summary, but that would have been the conclusion. But I'm left with only 5 minutes. I have tried to push that through. I would give you an opportunity to ask questions. We organized this rather quickly. I will have also a table where I can sit down. You can talk to me personally before my train departs. Yes. Okay. Do not waste the time by giving me a hand. Who has a question? Where was I off the point? Hi. A question. You say young girls do not find any role models, for example, car mechanics, and young boys do not find role models of men, for example, being very caring. I recently read BBC. Bob, der Baumeister, Bob the engineer has been taken out of the program because traditional role stereotypes were shown, the man being the artisan. Instead, they entered a comic. The woman is here the artisan, and she has a male assistant. What do you make of this? Is it a legitimate means? Well, let's put it like this. At this point, I see the glass half full. At least somebody has understood something and has even translated it into a concept. So I would welcome this as a change. But again, no women's bashing. It may also happen that they go beyond the line or over the top. I remember those posters, castrate all men, and so that's over the top. Well, we need to accept it. It's acceptable that the BBC or any TV station cannot get two role models, both a man and a woman, working together at eyes level. Here, I would say the glass is half full because at least they show a certain reflection on gender stereotypes. We see it everywhere in society. I would also agree with Alexander. Young women that believe they are utterly emancipated without listening to the elder women, that they lose any empathy, for example, for male victims of violence. That is understandable. We need, my ideal would be that we both suffer, this winner-loser model of the partnership. I find this so preposterous. If it's better for women, then men will fare worse. Go with this concept. Everything that's good for me is bad for my wife. Now, enjoy, I can only say. No, we have win-win situations or lose-lose situations. It's a common problem. In 400 years' time, there will be TV series where women and men tinker around together with cars, and men and women take care of children together.
Ich habe noch 10 Minuten.
I just was given 10 more minutes. Great. Or you have been given 10 more minutes because it's your turn now with the questions. Well, I don't really have a question, but a remark. They're standing somewhere, obviously. Legs apart. Well, my legs have this shape. No, normally you're standing there, your feet apart a little bit, you're standing there very strongly, speak out, say what you think. So you have your position that you defend. You're a father, you have a good sense of humor, you are very strong rhetorically as well. Yeah, so I see a real guy there, and you said you're not a real man, you're not a real guy. You kept mentioning that. I don't know what gave you this weird idea that you're not a real guy. Well, thank you. I love this. It's great. No, well, okay. I hope that you also noticed this or detected this self-ironic touch. You see, of course, when you say something ironic, there's always something true about it. So I didn't tell you anything that was wrong. This is where I come from. I have this background, but today I do not, and I no longer have this feeling that I'm not a real man. Although I have to say the feeling is still there a bit. It never really goes away. To be honest, you never get rid of this feeling. When I enter a room like this, and I see all the men here full of muscles, you know, this has an impact on me, as we psychos say. But I can compensate for that intellectually. Okay, we'll open up a tiny little men club. Okay, now this topic of gender studies, you see, I've dealt with it quite a lot recently, but I know it's also a very complicated issue. Of course, it's part of the public debate, and now that you're here, I wanted to ask you this question. We used to have a clearer distinction between men and women in the previous presentation. You know, there was this clear division between men and women, whereas you speak out for boys dancing ballet, or boys who should be allowed to dance ballet. And I think this is a bit problematic. Because Jordan Peterson, that's a name that has already been mentioned here today, I read quite a lot of his works, and he says that differences in the way we play as children exist, even in apes, in monkeys. So he doesn't believe it's a cultural thing, but he believes it's a natural thing that boys and girls play in different ways. So this idea to say, let's give boys dolls to play with, let's give little girls weapons, or let's say excavators, you know, these typical masculine toys. I think that is problematic, because then there will people like in the United States, where you have more guys who tell their 4 or 5 or 6-year-old boys, come on, you are not tied to your masculinity. You don't have to be a boy. You can also be a girl. And I think that is extremely difficult and confusing for little children. Why don't we let men be men and women be women to a certain, until they reach a certain age at least? And I'd like to know what your position is on that one. Well, of course, I can totally agree with a lot of things that you say. I mean, denying a sexual identity doesn't really make a lot of sense. Now, if the boy or the girl discovers one day that he or she believes that the sexual identity they have is not correct, then that's a different story, of course. But that's only a very small percentage of mankind. Of course, it's nonsense to offer a 6-year-old boy that he can also be a girl. That doesn't make any sense. But what I was talking about is the options. Now, let's talk about let's stick to this example. Let's go on talking about the boy who wants to do ballet. What I said is not, I want a society where boys do ballet. What I said was, I want a society where boys have the chance to do ballet without being discriminated against. And the same, of course, applies to girls. Now, if this means that, well, let's be modest, in 800 years from now, there will still only be 1% of boys who dance ballet, or 10% of boys who dance ballet. So if the share will still be so low in a few centuries from now, then obviously it is clear that biologically speaking, boys don't like to do ballet. So of course it would be insane, it would be crazy to deny that biology plays a role. I mean, if you have a look around, then you will see that it does play a role. We just heard about Bob, you know. So it would be totally gaga, it would be totally crazy to deny there are cultural processes going on. That's like Donald Trump denying the existence of climate change. So it's an interaction of the two, the biological predisposition and cultural influences. And even in 1,000 years from now, nobody will have found out how many percent is due to the one and how many percent is due to the other. We would have to really lock boys and girls up in dark rooms for 10 years, and then when they leave the room again, then we can see what kinds of toys they play with, although they will probably not want to play anymore after these 10 years. So there's no contradiction between these two factors that may have an impact. And as far as Alexander goes, you see, it would be great to have a talk with him, to have a discussion with him. And he also described something. He described his theory. And as much as I can agree with this description or with the development that he described, that does not necessarily mean that it will go on like this in the future. Maybe the development will look differently in the future. And personally, as a psychoanalyst, I prefer to have a look at the individual person and not societies as a whole. And I want to see where is the individual standing. So this individual needs options. You should have the chance to enter different rooms. Open the door, walk inside and see what's going on there. And if you don't like it, then you never go back again, return. It's like Alexander, he said, don't go to your girlfriend's dinner with your girlfriends. And I say, well, go there. And if you don't like it, never go there again. So that's a different approach I have, that's all. Do we have any more time? Okay. Well, yes, I have a question. First of all, Mr. Süfke, thank you very much for this excellent presentation and also for the thoughts that you shared with us about the culture of failing men. I would really welcome such a culture. Now, I'm being a bit provocative. When I heard your last remarks, in particular this example about the children's birthday that you gave, this story that you told us, I have the impression that you are a bit aggressive there. So my question is, do we really need this kind of aggressive confrontation? Or couldn't we also be a bit more relaxed? Well, being relaxed is not my strength. You see, I have an app that tells me every morning, start the day with relaxation. And every morning, and every time I read this, I'm getting aggressive. So I try not to be overly aggressive. And that's what I also tried to do today. I always say, whenever I make a remark, I add something like, but I'm not intending to bash women, or I'm not saying anything against men. So I always try to make it a bit more moderate, a bit less aggressive. Because, you see, if I said, well, of course we need confrontation, of course we have to be aggressive, then this would really just be an attempt to justify the fact that I do the things the way I do them, because I'm just that type, and that wouldn't help you. We all have to do it our own way. But once again, I think it is important to be spot on, to be very clear. For example, this example, from the children's birthday party, there, of course, it was very important to say quite clearly, why do you want to call my wife? You can ask me what a nice present for our kid might be. I mean, you can say this in a polite manner, but you should say this. You shouldn't just remain silent. You should talk about it. And at the risk of repeating myself, I don't really believe that we have to fight for this with women. I think we're sitting in one and the same boat, the women and us. It's the whole problem that the society faces as a whole. There is a division in our society, but this division is between those men and women who just accept and imitate and copy gender roles without thinking about them, and on the other hand, those men and women who don't do it that way and who want to change something. That's where the division line goes through our society, not just between men and women. And you see, that's where I am perhaps sometimes a little bit aggressive. In a way, I have this sense of being on a mission. You get the last question. Well, yes, I agree with you as far as this division line, this dividing line goes. Now, this is a men's congress, and of course we see a lot of things from the perspective of men, which is absolutely natural and normal. But sometimes I also find myself in a dilemma. Let's think about, for example, the role model. When you say that like 98% of all kindergarten staff members are women, and you have lots of female teachers at schools, then my question is, isn't that also just due to the pay, to the salary? I mean, I know how much you normally earn when you do work in the social area, and that's why men say, no, I don't want to do a very tough and difficult job just for 1,000 euros a month. So the salaries are quite low, that you can't make a lot of money there. And let's not talk about exactly how much money you need to survive, but by comparison, the salaries and wages are very low for, for quite hard work. So that's the reason, perhaps. So what can we do about it as men? But I don't know if you wrote this book by Jack Irvin. He wrote this book, I think it's entitled Toxic Masculinity. Did you read it? No? It's a young English guy, Toxic Masculinity, I think that's the title. And he used this example. He said, the boss goes to the male employee and says, hey, John. I'll try to translate it into English because he'll get the translation back into English anyway, so I'll translate it from English into German. Hey, John, the boss says, what about that? You'll get 25% less from now on to make sure that Sarah, who works next door, can get 25% more. And John says, boss, what's the benefit for me? And the boss says, well, a fair society. And John says, well, I don't think so. And here I think, and now I'm the missionary again, here I think we have to explain to John what the benefit would be for him. He would feel this satisfaction that he no longer is the victim of the idea, the concept of traditional masculinity. We have to explain to John what the benefits are for him, because otherwise it will be very difficult to reach such a reallocation, such a redistribution. I mean, it is a fact. It's not only about the payment, by the way. It's not only about the salary, but also about the prestige, the image. And there are studies that suggest that, like, some jobs, like my jobs, that get less and less paid the more women start to work in that field. For example, psychologists, they used to earn a lot of money, and then you had more and more women working in that field, and all of a sudden the salaries dropped. And my solution, or a part of the solution, I think, would be, and that's why I'm writing these books, we have to make it clear to men, we have to make men understand that, you see, if I was John and Sarah was my wife, I would say, well, sure, I don't care which of the two earns the money, just as long as the household has the money in the end. It doesn't matter if my wife earns it or if I earn it, it's no problem. But in order to be able to say that, we as men really have to understand what's the benefit for us, what's good about that for us, what's the advantage for us if we don't have to work 80 hours a week. I'm not saying it's a bad thing to work 80 hours a week. It's up to everyone to develop his own kind of masculinity. Okay, now that we're just starting a controversial discussion, we're running out of time, obviously, but maybe we can continue the controversy or the discussion during the lunch break at the table. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.